Hi there. Welcome to our webinar, How Healthful is Your Diet? My name is John Brenberg. I'm a dietitian and manager for UF Health Employee Wellness in Jacksonville. So we're glad you are tuned in to learn a little bit more about healthy eating. We're going to do this in a question format. So you'll be asked a series of questions or statements, and you're simply going to answer whether it's a yes, a no, or a maybe. And what we're going to do with this information is to help you take a closer look at your eating habits and try to identify maybe one or two key areas to work on. There is a lot of confusion that exists about healthy eating, and it reminds me of a very old joke, and I got it up on your screen there. So a man walks into a doctor's office. He has a cucumber up his nose, a carrot in his left ear, and a banana in his right ear, and doctor looks at him and says, "Look, I know what's the matter with you. You're not eating properly." So, yes, that joke is a perfect segue into today's talk about what healthy eating is, and more importantly, how to individualize it to suit your needs, because we can have 10 different people on 10 different diet plans, and all of them could be eating healthy. So, it's a matter of perspective. I like to define healthy eating by just looking at it from a pattern standpoint, meaning that it's not necessarily based on individual foods, but really it's the pattern of food selections. And this pattern is providing your body with not just the best nutrients to maintain your physical well-being, but the best balance of nutrients to help your mental well-being too, because food is such an important part of our lives. And really the lesson, as I said before, is that there are many different ways to eat healthy. What we're doing with today's webinar is, trying to learn a little bit more about what are some of the aspects that typically make up a healthy diet. But also you should understand that there's really not a perfect way to assess the healthfulness of any one diet. I want you to use this exercise really just a matter of pinpointing one or two key areas. Nutrition is never black and white. There are kernels of truth and little pockets of misinformation you might find online and in social media, but there's rarely an always or never in nutrition. I also want you to understand this presentation really isn't meant to replace any medical advice you have already been given in terms of your personal eating plan, but also, more importantly, let you know that we do have resources available here for UF Health employees. We can talk with a registered dietitian and develop an expert-led and guided individualized approach to healthy eating. I think that's the most important thing to remember in all this. And I will share with you at the end a link in which you can book your appointment. So here's what we're going to do. So I'm going to go through a series of statements. So on your screen, you'll see the first statement. And what I want you to do is answer to yourself whether this is a yes, a no, or a sometimes. And as we go through these statements, I want you to make a note of all of the no's, which area might be a no, because those are the areas that I'm going to ask you to work on. Okay, when we look about trying to prioritize healthy eating, it's all about trying to make a few small changes and not try to take on too much at one time. But by looking at some of the no's first, that can go a long way at helping improve the healthfulness of our overall diet. Because everything that we'll look at here typically is the characterization of healthy eating for most individuals. So the first one, not too surprisingly here, we want to try to see how many fruits and vegetables are you eating each day. So let's say I eat fruits and vegetables with most of my meals. So is that a yes, a no, or a sometimes? We're all well versed in all the different nutritional benefits of a diet rich in plant foods. So go ahead and figure out where you are on this statement. The next statement, I eat the portion sizes that are appropriate for my weight or my desired weight. So are your portion sizes above what your target should be based on what your weight goals are? So if that's a no, make a note of that too. There are a few resources out there that can help you understand a little bit more about portion sizes. Again, in addition to meeting with our dietitian, you can go to myplate.gov and they have steps where you can enter in your activity level, your age, your weight, and it'll give you more of a specific guidance in terms of volume of food and fruits and vegetables and grains and meats, so on and so forth. Next statement, I eat protein-rich foods such as fish, dairy, meat, beans, tofu, or eggs at most of my meals. So protein obviously is a very important component towards healthy eating. We know diets that are adequate in protein, again, doesn't have to be high in protein, just needs to be adequate. But diets that are adequate in protein can also help preserve lean muscle mass as we get older. So that's very important. So ask yourself, are you including some of these protein-rich foods at most of your meals? Of the protein-rich foods that are out there, we do see marvelous health benefits from diets that are rich in beans and lentils. So if you're eating beans and lentils several times a week, go ahead and give yourself a yes here. If it's a no, that might be an area to also take a look at because of all the health benefits we attribute to beans and lentils. First and foremost, being adequate and very rich sources of dietary fiber, too. Next statement, I eat fatty fish, salmon, tuna, etc., a couple of times each week. So this is really reflective of the American Heart Association's goal for healthy eating to prevent heart disease. So diets that are adequate in fatty fish, rich in omega-3 fats, that's really what we're looking at here with this type of statement, can go a long way at helping potentially lower your risk for heart disease. So are you a yes, a no, or a sometimes? And again, keep track of these no's because those are the ones that we want to try to work on later on. And when you look at seafood selection, there's lots of choices out there, and one of the things that's important to be mindful of are contaminants. We know that a lot of the fish in our waters are exposed to a lot of harmful sources of mercury and other issues. So we want to be mindful of the type of seafood that we're selecting, not just getting seafood that's rich in omega-3 fats on a regular basis, but also trying to make sure it's as clean as possible. So the Environmental Working Group, which does a lot of work in the seafood space, has shared with you information on what they would characterize foods that are not just high in omega-3 fat, but also low in mercury. Some of those higher omega-3 fatty fish, like mackerel, for example, are pretty high up the food chain in terms of fish. So therefore, they eat a lot of the smaller fish and other items in the sea. So they tend to have much higher levels of mercury than anything else out there. So you're best off choosing salmon, sardines, rainbow trout, Atlantic mackerel. Those appear to be a lot lower in mercury, and they're also using sustainable farming practices too with these types of seafood selections. But if you want to learn more information, you go to ewg.org, and they have several types of consumer guides available to help you make the best seafood selection for you and your family. And of course, when we look at preparation methods for seafood, we're typically going to advocate grilled and broiled in lieu of fried fish. Next item, about snacks. Everyone loves to snack, yourself, myself, everybody. When I snack, I typically choose nuts, fruits, yogurts, or vegetables. So is that a yes, a no, or a sometimes? And again, remember, all we're doing with this health assessment, this healthy diet assessment, is just trying to prioritize areas of potential change. Don't want everyone to have a yes. Might be unlikely. There are always areas for improvement there, even if it's a sometimes. But when we know the snacks are typically in their whole food form, they're going to have less added sugar, less added fat, less added salt, and typically going to have much more beneficial nutrients for you, including dietary fiber. So ask yourself that statement there. If you're going to snack, what are you typically choosing? Next up, I limit animal fats and solid fats like fatty cuts of meat, prime rib, for example, chicken wings, for example, bacon grease, butter, and coconut oil. So is that a yes, a no, or a sometimes? And of course, the issue here is trying to reduce to a practical extent the amount of saturated fat in a person's diet. So we have seen research where saturated fat is, depending on its food source, is somewhat equivocal in your risk for heart disease. But one thing we do know is not beneficial. So even if it's a neutral impact on our risk for heart health, these types of food choices are also very high in calories too. So again, it's important to be mindful of that. So are you limiting those types of food selections? Next up, I recognize and listen to my body's hunger and fullness cues. Is this a yes, no, or sometimes? And this might be difficult to put a finger on here, but just ask yourself, how many times have you eaten to the point of being uncomfortable? Okay, a lot of times we emerge from our Thanksgiving meal. We're like, oh, I'm so stuffed. That's the type of behavior we're trying to minimize when we look at the aspects here in this particular statement. Are you really recognizing when you're hungry and when you're full, or are you influenced a lot by food cravings and visual cues for food items that really can kind of spontaneously trigger a sensation of hunger, but not true hunger? And this is where mindful eating can play a very important role too, making sure you're fully aware of the food in front of you, trying to minimize those distractions so you can really enjoy and savor the food and not engage in too much mindless eating. Next up, I avoid sugary drinks like sodas, juices, and sweet tea. So this is just a selection of a few sugar sweetened beverages. So is this a yes, no, or sometimes? And of course, the reason this is here is we're just trying to minimize added sugar. And when we look at typical consumption of high sugar foods, sugar sweetened beverages appear to take up the largest component of that category. Now, again, we all have different approaches to eating and we all might have different levels of consumption in this area, but overall, by and large, as a population in the United States, most of our sugar is coming from these types of beverages. And the issue here is that besides the exposure to added sugar, we're also getting a lot of added calories. And it's very easy to overconsume these types of choices because it's just liquid. All right, this one has to do a little bit more with food preparation. And that is, are you favoring herbs and spices over salt when seasoning your food? So as you're putting together meals at home or wherever you might be, are you leaning more on herbs and spices for seasoning or you're using the salt shaker? Is that a yes, no, or sometimes? And a related statement here, this one also is asking questions about sodium food choices, but are you limiting highly processed foods like the chips and the crackers and the snack bars, things that we find, typically along one grocery store aisle? These are what we would call ultra processed foods, and these tend to be very high in added sodium. And in fact, when we look at sodium and salt, talked about the statement preceding this talked about seasoning, but most of the salt in our diet actually comes from these types of processed foods and not from what we're actually adding. So if we look at, the typical sources of sodium in our diet, 71% of it's already in processed and restaurant foods, where just anywhere from, you know, 10 to 11% is really added at the table or during preparation of our meals. So if you really want to dial down the sodium in your diet, take a close look at two things: the type of snacks that you're selecting and how often are you dining out, because that's typically where we find a lot of additional sodium in our diets. Next one, I choose whole grain foods more often than refined grains. So refined grains, those often are going to be a lot of the white flour and enriched flour products. So think of your white rice and white bread and regular pasta, whereas whole grain has the entire grain intact. And of course, is not just going to have dietary fiber, but also greater sources of B vitamins too. So is this a yes, no, or sometimes? And one way to really look and making sure you're finding whole grain foods is just look to the ingredients. Look at those ingredients. You should see the word whole in there in front of whatever type of grain it might be. Some examples, of course, would include brown rice, quinoa, wild rice, whole wheat, barley, farro, oatmeal, popcorn. Again, these are all examples of some whole grain foods, and these are very healthful components of a diet. Speaking of label reading, do you read labels? Are you looking at the food labels to determine the nutritional content of your foods? And I'll tell you, this is important, but it also can be very overwhelming. So what I mean by overwhelming is that every food out there is basically just trying to get you to buy it. When you go to the grocery store, every food package you see out there has got several different types of claims on there. This is just one example. You can see all the different statements here. Fruit is our first ingredient now with more real fruit. I'm not sure what they were using before, but good for them. 100% of vitamin C, 25% of vitamin A and E. So you see on and on, several claims here. What I typically tell people in a lot of our healthy eating programs is to just ignore the front of the package. It's all marketing. If you really want to find out what you're getting, just look at the nutrition facts and the ingredients and make your choice there. This will tell you everything you need to know. Everything else is just marketing. So look at all those claims that preceded this particular nutrition facts panel and come to find out this thing that looked like it did everything from, give us healthy choices to saving the rainforest, actually is just a combination of 4 different types of sugar: the fruit juice, the corn syrup, the sugar, and the modified cornstarch. So not likely the most healthful food choice. It has 11 grams of added sugar. So again, 11 grams out of 25, that's almost 50%. So again, there might be better choices out there. So that's all we're looking at when we're looking at nutrition labels to analyze and study nutrition content. Don't get tricked by all the marketing, but instead focus on the nutrition facts and the ingredients and compare among foods that you are willing to eat. Because remember, it's not good nutrition if nobody's going to eat it. So try to find similar products in this, for example, a fruit snack category. You can do the same with breakfast cereals. You can do the same with other types of items. Try to find items that you and your family are willing to eat. And again, try to choose those items that are maybe less in added sodium, less in added sugar, and go forward from there. That tends to be the most practical approach that I've found over the years. And last but not least, when you do eat sweets, because they are fun, they are delicious, and when you eat fried foods, are you limiting your portion sizes? So is this a yes, no, or sometimes? So hopefully you took a note of all the different no's you might have had. And again, this quiz wasn't meant to be the end all be all for dictating what a healthy diet is, but just try to pick 2 or 3 areas to work on. The key to eating healthy is finding an approach that you can sustain and still meet your health goals and like your life. I mean, that's really all it comes down to. Yes, you want to commit to a diet that's more comprised of whole foods and lower in those ultra processed and refined foods, but really it's all about finding an approach that's sustainable for you. So that could be an intermittent fasting approach. It could be a Mediterranean diet. It could be a lower sodium diet or a lower carb diet. It's really a matter of what your goals are and what's important to you and what you can sustain. And this is why talking to a dietitian can be so helpful. And again, this is a service that we provide to our employees at no charge. So if you want to schedule an appointment and meet with Krupa, who is our licensed dietitian that handles these issues, go ahead and scan that QR code and you'll pull up her schedule and sit down and see what's going on in terms of your nutrition world. So thank you again for tuning in to this webinar. This again was recorded from a previous live session, but if you want to still get credit for viewing this webinar, you can scan this QR code too, and that'll take you to a screen. We'll ask you a couple of questions, get some key information so we can share it with our Florida Blue team to ensure you get the wellness credit for viewing this webinar. And I do thank you for your time and have a good rest of your day.